In this exciting episode, the murderer gets the last word. Aye, aye, Captain. It's Season 1, Episode 16 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Demure Defendant. Welcome to the 16th episode of the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple. Provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series and, if time permits, to cover some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode, I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each week in the Law Library, we return to prior episodes to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. This week, we investigate Mason's judges. For a couple of episodes there, Perry was making it scarce in the courtroom, and it made me consider the adjudicators Perry's encountered thus far. There's, of course, the small-town judges like Judge Meeham and Judge Norwood in the case of the drowning duck and angry mourner, respectively. But here is the really interesting thing. Perry's encountered the same judges a couple of times, though none, I might add, are Harold Miller, the judge who hands Perry the file in the Season 1 opening credits, and three of the series' most frequent all-time judges, Kenneth MacDonald, Frank Wilcox, and Grandin Rhodes, have already appeared, some multiple times in the first 16 episodes. Frank Wilcox, in particular, has appeared 3 times thus far. So what's curious? Wilcox's character has had a different name each time he's appeared. He's been Judge Markham, Judge Randolph, and Judge Newark. No wonder Perry gets testy with the law. All the judges look the same, but really aren't, and nobody seems to remember how mistaken the Law and Order guys have been from case to case. It's enough to drive a man to eat. A lot. At Clay's Grill. Now to this week's episode. The Case of the Demure Defendant. So despicable is Uncle Martin, this episode's murder victim, that the episode ends with the murderer, only revealed in the final scene, getting the last word.
You don't owe me nothing, and I don't owe you nothing. The way I look at it, I'll still come out ahead.
There's nothing from Perry or Della to contradict the smiling octogenarian Captain Hugo. Just cue the credits. We've encountered despicable villains before. Tidings, the deceased in the case of the baited hook, comes to mind. But the writers Ben Brady and Richard Gray basically give Captain Hugo, or Pappy, as Nadine calls him, a pat on the back for offing the frightening Uncle Martin. The episode gives us a villainous type that the show will return to, the totalitarian family member who controls a younger generation through his amassed fortune. Martin rules Nadine, his de facto maid and real-life niece, through fear.
As for you and John Locke, that's useless, too. Nothing good can come of it.
You're wrong, Uncle. John and I have already set the date. Let go of me.
You won't marry John Locke. You'll do as you're told.
When I was a child, You filled my life full of fear and humiliation. Now all I have left for you is contempt.
He also rules the Vultures, Nadine's sister and brother-in-law, Marion and Lester Newbern, through the lure of cash. They hang around hoping he'll give them money when he croaks, but he's a ruthlessly vindictive soul who first ruins Nadine's engagement by threatening to release information to her fiancé John Locke that shows Nadine's father was criminally insane.
Those are just the photostats. I'll send the originals to your husband for a wedding present.
No.
Oh, yes. So you plan to have a big family, huh? What'll you do if the kids take after your side?
Then goads Marion and Lester into admitting that no one deserves to be taken care of before letting slip this little nugget.
You've done more than enough for her already.
I thought you'd approve.
If people can't make their own way in life, they shouldn't expect others to keep them.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. I'm leaving my entire estate, property and money, to the people who have done the most for me. The Hartford Medical Foundation.
But, Uncle Martin, what about me?
You just answered that question yourself.
And doesn't give 20-year employee Hugo anything in his will. This case is a doozy. Nadine has stolen some cyanide pills, and Uncle Martin ends up dead. The next thing we know, she's confessing that she's committed the crime while under sedation at her psychiatrist's office.
Who'd ever think that those little pills could take a person's life? If I put them in his chocolate, he'd never... No! No, Uncle Martin, I didn't mean it. I was going to use them on myself.
And soon Perry's enlisted to help get the psychiatrist out of hot water.
Well, Perry, I suppose you've heard the news.
Della just told me. The nurse couldn't wait to call the police.
If you think that's bad, wait till you hear the topper.
Might as well save the taxpayers the cost of picking me up.
Shouldn't like to be in your shoes.
Now that you mention it, Bob, they do pinch a little.
The DA's little bit of sloppiness in this episode involves gunshot. Two similar bottles, one that contains the murdering cyanide pills, the other which contains saccharin.
Now, this is Exhibit A, the empty shotgun shell. At one time, it contained lead shot, size number 5 lead shot. This is Exhibit C, the bottle which contains the saccharin. It also contains size number 5 lead shot. Exhibit B, the bottle which contains the cyanide, also contains lead shot, not number 5, but considerably larger.
Perry airs this problem. The case against Nadine is dismissed in short order. This is the rare episode where we leave court with the wrong impression about who really committed the crime.
Bailiff, I order this man into custody for deliberate perjury. I also suggest that the police immediately arrest Mrs. Newbern on suspicion of murder.
After giving the court the impression that Marion is guilty, Perry actually solves the case by confronting Captain Hugo. What awaits Nadine and John, those star-crossed lovers? We're never told. The 1956 novel that gives this episode most of its content is very similar to the episode adaptation, although there are a few key differences. One, the novel begins with the psychiatrist, and the novel's opening set piece is the psychiatrist Dr. Denere's ethical dilemma about keeping Nadine from the law's clutches. Perry, I guess, has become so used to the forces of law and order blowing it that he agrees to help Denere get Nadine off, even if she's guilty, just on general principle. Number 2, Nadine is not the deceased's niece. Neither is she the sister of Lester Newbern's wife. Rather, she is the illegitimate child of the deceased's dead business partner. She has come back to the character, who in the book is named Mosher Hiley, in the novel in order to blackmail him and get him to pay for her education. When she falls in love with John Locke, Mosher threatens to end the relationship by telling Locke's family that Nadine was illegitimate. And finally, number 3, the novel ends not with a confrontation mano a mano with Captain Hugo, but with Perry revealing to Paul that Captain Hugo was the murderer, and then basically telling Paul to keep that info, and when Berger's case against Mrs. Newbern founders, to give Berger the tip that will help solve the case. Perry never quite sticks it to Berger that way in the television series. And now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each week in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. A Della is something about a particular character in the story. And a Perry is something we learn about our main character. Our Paul this week concerns Della's burgeoning legal career. Having found the elusive John Locke, Perry and Della ask John where Nadine is, and he won't cooperate. So Della lets slip this legal advice.
Too bad you and Nadine aren't married. You know, a husband can't testify against his wife.
Is Perry upset? No, he just hopes the bar doesn't come down on her too hard.
I just hope the Bar Association doesn't get you for practicing without a license.
So this episode's research prompt is, would Della be in legal trouble for, quote, practicing, unquote, law without a license? Does her advice come with any additional expectations because she's the administrative assistant of an attorney? Or was this the same as your really well-informed neighbor telling you what to do? Our Della concerns Captain Hugo.
So you're Mason the lawyer?
You must be Captain Hugo.
Yep. How's Nadine?
I haven't seen her lately.
She didn't kill the old man.
Clem Bevins was a spry 79 years old when he appeared as the murderer in this episode. He had been performing since 1900 on vaudeville stages and had appeared in such big Hollywood flicks as Sergeant York and The Yearling. I can't think of another murderer who gets the last word in an entire episode. In court, sure, but it's typically Perry and the client in the final scene hashing some key detail out. Pappy is not long for this world. Let's just say a life sentence won't actually be that long for him. Our Perry this week concerns how our intrepid hero likes his hot dogs.
May I have a hot dog, please? With everything on it?
Coming right up.
That's right. Who would have suspected? He's a Buddhist. He'd like his hot dog to be one with everything. Our theme this week is debts. Captain Hugo's motto,
You don't owe me nothing, and I don't owe you nothing.
works as a motto for the entire episode. Nadine need not worry about her father's criminal record. His debts to society are not hers.
Do you still want to defend me, Mr. Mason?
Now listen to me, young lady. The best medical advice tells us criminal characteristics cannot be inherited.
In a rare bit of heavy-handed naming, Gardner gave Nadine's fiancé the very name of the philosopher most associated with the idea that every human being is a blank slate, John Locke. Uncle Martin, on the other hand, may publicly avow this statement, but his cash and blackmail materials on Nadine indicate he works only through obligation. Captain Hugo voices the lack of debt to Perry when he says he has to call the cops about the crime, and Perry must report the crime. So Hugo owes someone. Does the audience feel that Perry owes it to Hugo to let him go? Will Hugo still come out ahead in the end? We may feel more relieved that Nadine is free than at the fact that the murder was solved. But Hugo must pay for his crime. Every criminal in this show, and in real life, must pay his debt, whether to the state or to God. No scriptwriter can change that. Now it's time for a prairie proverb. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Our intrepid hero is certainly a complicated man. Last week, Perry was bemoaning his skepticism. This week, he's relying on it, especially in this exchange with Captain Hugo.
You might as well suspect me.
I do. I suspect everyone.
Perry had this same kind of relationship with Abigail Esther Leeds in the case of the baited hook. A.E. Leeds and Captain Hugo have seen a thing or two, a couple of world wars, a Great Depression, and they're certainly nobody's fool. Perry knows that sometimes being a good person doesn't mean you're not a murder suspect. He's wise enough to see that there's no one who's completely good. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand. Go on, Paul.
Thanks so much to those of you who gave me feedback on the last episode. Last time I asked if, like Sergeant Holcomb in the case of the Restless Redhead and the Fan Dancer's Horse, there were any characters in the Perry Mason show who were portrayed by two different actors. My Aunt Myra comments that Monty Markham played the character Perry Mason in another TV show called The New Perry Mason, a one-season ill-fated 1970s show. Since the last podcast, it's been announced that Matthew Rhys, the lead actor in the recently completed series The Americans, will portray Perry Mason in the rebooted show for HBO. So thanks to Aunt Myra for the tip, and that's 3 different actors who will portray Perry Mason for TV. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about this week's pod that you'd like to comment on? Something that you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website at theperrypod.libsyn.com or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Join me next time when Perry engages in a little cover-up. Literally, it's the case of the Sunbather's Diary next time on the Perry Pod. Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.